Morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Places and Spaces, which we like to think of as an irreverent, bi-monthly look at all things planning, which is brought to you by Cripps and by Andy Black Associates. Today I'm joined, as always, by Beth Gascoigne, Head of Planning at Cripps, and by Andy Black, Principal of Andy Black Associates. But also pleased to be joined by Andrew Howard, our guest today, who describes himself as a specialist in the politics of planning. So we've got some comments from Andrew a little bit later. We've got a packed programme today. Obviously lots of changes, lots of things have been happening. We've got a commentary on MPPF, Green Belt, Grey Belt, affordable housing solutions, maybe a little mention of brownfield passports, although they kind of keep falling off the agenda, but they may miraculously appear a bit later. I'm very keen to know what they are. And then a political and a planning roundup at the end. But let's get started. So since the last edition, we've had some pretty major events. Labour landslide victory, first Labour budget. I promise not to talk about Trump, but Trump's been re-elected. How that impacts on planning, I'm not sure, but you can never tell what impact he will have. And of course, we've had Oasis announce a reunion. So plenty of action since our last meeting. But we're 100 days already. Through 100 days of the new Labour government, and I think it's fair to say that it's been a busy time in the planning arena. If we go back a couple of months to the election itself and the Labour Party manifesto, we had major commitment from them in terms of how planning and construction and house building would feature in the first of the first few months of their administration. Housing delivery, a key thing. 1.5 million new homes were promised in the 5 years, 300,000 per year. Bold, ambitious aspirations, and I think I've talked before about the 300,000 target as a target that I think has only been met once before, end of the 60s, 1972. So big numbers that we're talking about. Immediately post-election, we've seen a further review of the MPPF. Now, I've only got 5 fingers on my hand. Andy, do I need another finger? How many reviews have we had in the last couple of years?
We worked out 6, didn't we, before, but actually it's 7 because there was one that was published in 2023 and then the next day they published another revision because they got it wrong about neighbourhood planning. So
my point is that we're again at a stage of an MPF review. And there was a lot of discussion both before budget and during the budget in terms of actions and announcements. There were a lot of policy statements that were leaked and were announced at the time. If we pause a moment and actually look at what the budget introduced, there are a number of things that are going to be impacting both in terms of house building, infrastructure projects, and planning generally. But let's just have a brief run through. I'm going to miss things out because there was so much that was there. But we've got a new planning and infrastructure bill to be published in the new year. I haven't seen a date yet for that, but it's promised soon. A commitment to, and I'll quote, provide certainty to industry on the objectives for nationally significant infrastructure. So again, big statement on infrastructure. £50 million to expedite the planning process. That's the 300 new graduate and apprentice planners that the government is looking to fund. 5 billion for settlement for housing, 3 billion in support of build-to-rent schemes, probably partly through access through by low-cost loans, 70 million to support housing infrastructure projects, whilst boosting nature's recovery. Again, direct quote there. And I think that will be linked to the 47 million that has been identified to unlock sites that are being blocked at the moment by nitrate or nutrient rather neutrality. £500 million extra funding for new affordable homes. I mean, there's more, but by any standards, these are pretty big statements. One of the questions I think that these statements throw up is coming back to the first point I mentioned, which was 300,000 homes a year. Are we going to hit that? There were some interesting observations a couple of weeks ago from James Marici at Landmark Chambers, where he very boldly said no, he didn't think that was going to be met. Partly because of the impact, this was his observations, the impact of environmental legislation and regulation as being a key factor in limiting the number of houses that are come forward. There is a commitment to fund measures to try to unlock nutrient neutrality, and I think that's got to be positive. But I think that the challenges remain about how to deal with habitat regulations. If you think of the last government, they made a perhaps clumsy attempt to address this, which, interesting, was opposed by Labour at the time. But I think it emphasises that tension between the environment and development. And until that tension is properly addressed, I think you're always going to have a problem with environmental matters or habitat regulations trumping development. I said I wouldn't mention Trump, but there we go. I think that is going to be there. I think something that is overlooked is the burden of dealing with the environmental matters falls pretty heavily on it falls on house builders, but falls very heavily on the smaller SME house builders. And I think it is showing in terms of the number of SME house builders in the market. It's pretty impossible for them to deal with some of the challenges that they've got. Okay, very, very broad overview there. We're going to look in a little bit more detail at some of those points. We're going to look at the MPPF. We're going to have Andy give us the view from the ground on the progress of local plans. We're going to have some commentary on affordable homes, and then we're going to have a discussion with Andrew in terms of some of the politics of planning and the key things that he thinks are shaping the agenda as we go forward. But first up, we've got Beth to talk about the number 7 NPPF. Seventh.
Okay, so proposed reforms number 7. The consultation has now closed. It ran until the 24th of December this year. And essentially what the draft is doing is proposing to reverse many of the changes made by Michael Gove in the December 2023 version of the current MPPF. And it's the consultation invited responses on a series of proposed reforms. It's been reported that there were thousands of responses.
10,000.
10,000. And rumours following that the government's response was likely to be delayed on account of the time it would take to review all of these. But it was announced, I think, was it right as part of the budget, that the government will respond to the MPPF consultation before the end of the year. So bets in, please, on when we think that's going to be.
19th of December is my bet.
What's your basis for that?
Some inside note.
Is there like a day of the week that they would do
I
this?
reckon that's when it's going to be.
Yeah, 19th.
The 19th is my birthday, so that would be
There you go.
That
Happy
would be a
birthday.
present,
Andrew.
wouldn't
Fun
it?
times
Yeah.
for you.
Well, the bookies are open on that, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. Anyway, so what's proposed to be in and what's out? Out, first of all, we've got beauty and the beautiful. Angela Rayner has argued that beauty means nothing really. It means one thing to one person and one thing to another. So that all the wording in the current version was preventing and blocking development. And it's an issue because it's too subjective. There are, however, plenty of provisions within the NPPF to ensure that development is still going to be in keeping with the local area, so the government feel there's sufficient rules and protection in place to be able to use this kind of language. What's in, excitingly, is a definition of grey belt. Labour ministers have been talking about grey belt since April, but without giving much detail. It was clear that they wanted to find a way of pressuring local authorities to agree to release more of their greenbelt land for development, and saw the concept of referring essentially to the ugly parts of the greenbelt as a way to do this. For the purposes of plan making and decision making, the NPPF sets out that grey-belt will be defined as land in the greenbelt comprising previously developed land and any other parcels and/or areas of greenbelt land that make a limited contribution to the 5 greenbelt purposes, but excluding those areas or assets of particular importance. So the consultation documents issued alongside the revised NPPF provide some further clarity, explaining that land which makes a limited contribution to the greenbelt purposes might have at least one of the following features. So it contains substantial built development or is fully enclosed by built form. It makes very little contribution to preventing neighbouring towns from merging into one another. It's dominated by urban land uses, including physical developments, and it contributes little to preserving the setting and special character of historic towns. From a development management perspective, the introduction of the Grey Belt Review essentially creates a sequential approach to the release of land. So essentially you have brownfield first, then Grey Belt, and then Green Belt. In addition, expanding the definition of what is not inappropriate development in the Green Belt to include Grey Belt land in sustainable locations, or where local planning authorities can't meet their 5-year housing land supply, or where it can be demonstrated that development is not of local, regional or national importance, which justifies the need for land to be released. This has the potential to create new opportunities for the release of housing land. However, if Labour's proposed changes to the NPPF are adopted, bringing forward Grey Belt lands will, however, still be challenging, with issues around viability and predictions that many sites will likely be subject to kind of restrictive covenants and other kind of property restrictions which apply to those kind of areas of land. Next, we've got in, which is mandatory new housing targets. These are perhaps the most consequential changes that Labour proposes to make the NPPF, where Gove reformed the framework to change the outcome of the standard method for assessing housing need to be an advisory starting point from which exceptional circumstances could justify deviation. Under Rayner's rule, the targets would become mandatory. Interestingly, targets in London will drop significantly, mainly as a result of scrapping the urban uplift. Under the previous method, London had been expected to deliver 100,000 homes annually, which constitutes almost a third of nationwide housing need. But the new target for London is around 80,000, which is still substantially higher than the 53,000 accounted for in London's local plan and the 35,000 actually built in the capital last year. But despite the scrapping of the urban uplift nationwide, the new method generates a target of 371,500 net additional homes a year, up from 305,700 under the previous method and significantly higher than the 231,000, which is the aggregate of the local housing targets in adopted plans. Next, we have out. 4-year housing land supply requirement is to be abolished. This is another significant change in the draft NPPF and is the restoration of the requirement for all local planning authorities to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, even when a local plan is less than 5 years old. This marks a reversal from the softened housing land supply requirements introduced in December 2023, which allowed local planning authorities with recently adopted plans to demonstrate only a 4-year supply. The restatement of the 5-year requirement, along with the removal of the ability to count previous oversupply against future need, makes it clear the government are determined to ensure a steady pipeline of housing. We've got more generally just economic growth. While policies on housing, Greenbelt and the renewables have dominated the headlines, proposed changes to the NPPF also signal a more positive approach to economic growth. Updates to the chapter on economic growth are predominantly focused on industrial and industry uses, where planning policies should be identifying sites to meet emerging needs and drive economic growth. The NPPF proposes to expressly state or expressly require LPAs to identify appropriate sites for the needs of the modern economy with, I think they've identified laboratories, gigafactories, data centres, digital infrastructure, freight and logistics, which all remain undefined in the policy, but they're specifically highlighted. There's also a new requirement to make provision for the expansion or modernisation of other industries of local, regional or national importance to support economic growth and resilience. This is a quote. By prioritising commercial development that aligns with the needs of the modern economy, the government is signalling its commitment to innovation. It wants to ensure the UK remains competitive on the global stage, and once again they're looking at planning policy and changes in order to be able to demonstrate that. However, the success of this strategy will depend on the ability of local planning authorities to identify and deliver suitable sites for commercial development, as well as the willingness of developers to invest in these sectors. We have affordable housing and Greenbelt. Affordable housing remains a key priority in the draft NPPF, with the government proposing new policies to ensure the mix of affordable housing meets local needs. Notably, the existing requirement for 10% of homes to be provided for affordable home ownership has been removed. Instead, the government proposes bringing first homes into guidance following a ministerial statement on the subject in 2021 and an emphasis on meeting local needs across social and intermediate tenures. A 50% affordable housing target, which will be subject to viability, has been introduced for residential developments on the Greenbelt. And in addition, land released from the Greenbelt through planning applications will also need to secure relevant infrastructure improvements and provision of local green spaces, which are probably likely to be easier to meet than the 50% affordable housing provision. But I'll come on to that more after Andy.
Thanks, Beth. You got through all of that without the mention of brownfield passports, which I think we'll just leave out there hanging. I don't know whether is a brownfield passport something you need to get into the green belt, or is it something you require to get into the grey belt? Not sure, but we want to know at some point what a brownfield passport is going to look like. Very, very succinct summary there in terms of changes that we've got. Andy, local plans. Where are we on the ground? You've got some news in terms of how you see things panning out.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I just thought it might be helpful, James, to just kind of go through my experience over the last 6 months since Labour came in, how it's translating to on the ground decisions and the feeling of what's coming out of the process now. So. I do a lot of local plan work, as you know. Spent a lot of time this year at Elmbridge Council and their local plan process. Elmbridge is an area, as we all know, of significant housing need. It's an important authority, directly adjoins London, sits within Surrey. It's an affluent area. You've got the likes of Weybridge, Esher, Walton, Cobham, those sorts of towns there. But it's got a lot of greenbelt. It has an old pre-NPPF plan. It struggled with 5-year housing land supplies. A lot of those local authorities have in Surrey. And as I say, there's a lot of greenbelt there. And preparing a plan in Elmbridge, as with a lot of these authorities, is very tricky. It's a very political area. And members decided to go down a route where they weren't going to release any greenbelt at all. And they were going to take a brownfield-only approach to meeting their housing need. But as a result, they could only get to about half of the housing requirement under the standard method. The examination process started earlier on in the year, before, effectively in the summer, before Labour even got in. a very senior inspector, Krista Masters, going through that process, and as a result, having got to the end of that, back in effectively kind of September, she released her reports and initial findings back to the council to say, look, I'm not happy that you're only meeting half of your housing need. You've got a huge housing need, huge issues of affordability. The affordability ratio in the likes of Elmbridge is somewhere between 15 and 18 times average salaries. So those sorts of issues have to be dealt with by delivery of housing, or partly. So the inspector said, look, you're going to need to come back to me and come back with some thoughts around how you could meet that housing need better. This was on the back, of course, of when Rayner came in and her written ministerial statement of saying, I'm not going to accept long delays in local plan processes anymore, and 6 months is the maximum I'm going to accept, and they'd already had a pause before. The council came back and said, yes, there's a lot of work to do, which it is, they're right, and they said we need between 12 and 15 months to do that work. The inspector came back and said, nope, that's too long. You withdraw your plan or I'm going to find it unsound, and shut the door quite abruptly in Elmbridge's face. The council are now challenging that, and it'll be interesting to see, but that's one example of seeing certainly the pressure that Rayner's created feeding back through the inspectors, back to the councils, and I think that will be an interesting one to watch. Off the back of that, an adjoining authority, Spelthorne, they submitted their plan back in early 2023, and it coincided effectively with elections in the borough, and there was a kind of new intake of members, several members left and new kind of seats. The new council members all felt that they hadn't really had a chance to have a say in that local plan process. So they actually wanted to withdraw that plan from examination and effectively start again. And at that point, the government, it was Rachel McLean at the time, stepped in and said, I'm going to use my ministerial powers to stop you withdrawing your plan. They had been on pause effectively for a year, and I think very closely watching what was happening over in Elmbridge. They voted to withdraw all of their Greenbelt sites in their plan and go down a similar route to Elmbridge. They were doing some more work on flooding, and I think then they realised that given the Elmbridge scenario, that strategy wasn't going to result in a sound plan. So they have now voted to put those Greenbelt sites back in. They're going to continue with their examination. But again, it's another example. We've seen a pause of a long time on that, and that's going to get moving again. And then finally, a borough you know very well, James, is over in Mid-Sussex. Their examination started in September. I'm representing a number of sites and clients of yours actually in that. That's a borough, as you know, and a district very constrained around housing supply. Lots of adjoining authorities there, particularly you've got Crawley with very tightly drawn boundaries that has Gatwick Airport in the middle of it. Horsham, we know, suffered with water neutrality over the years, and Brighton, of course, as well, huge housing need and struggles to meet it. You've got South Downs National Park, you've got areas of AONB, so very difficult for an authority like that to meet even its own need, which they are attempting to do, let alone meet need of other adjoining boroughs. That unmet need of those adjoining boroughs is somewhere in the region of 17,000 homes over the lifetime of the plan. So you're talking huge numbers of unmet need. You're talking a big task to demonstrate to an inspector that a duty to cooperate has been met properly, and they've gone through the initial stages of their plan. Again, with all these plans, and I don't make any criticism of the officers involved in they're working to try and achieve a sound plan, but they're in a situation where they're still working in effectively a hangover of Conservative with an old MPPF in a very much a situation that's in a lot of flux, very dynamic situation, and it's very difficult to see how that works until we start to see where strategic planning might go and what might happen, how will that work. So that's kind of very much on the ground, but you know, we are seeing plans adopted just in the last month. Barking and Dagenham, Mole Valley, Dover and Crawley all adopted their local plans after some time going through, but just in those 4 plans alone, that's 66,000 homes that are allocated in those plans. So you're talking about significant amounts of housing that is coming through. I just wanted to mention a few other things, and again, we're now in an interesting scenario, obviously post-election, where we have a Labour mayor, and obviously in terms of London, and a Labour government, and this kind of aligning of the two, and I think we're starting to see how that might work in delivery of housing. And of course we've got other metro mayors across the country where that's replicated. Before the election, in the kind of dying days of the Conservative government, Gove placed Khan effectively on formal notice that he put him under his written direction to say, I'm going to demand that you undertake an early review of your plan. And at that point that was concentrating very much on industrial land. We know that the previous inspector of the London plan mentioned that there really needs to be a review of the green belt properly in London. But Gove was saying that you need to really up your game. Beth mentioned it earlier. The average delivery, 37,000 homes over the last 5 years in London. The London plan target is 62,000. The standard method currently is probably around 100,000, and many people think it's a lot more for London. One of the immediate things, though, was Rayner wrote to Khan back in September and said, I'm going to release you from that formal that formal mandate from Gove, but was very clear to Gove that he's got to up his game here. Sorry, to Khan even, and said, look, under the standard method, that's saying that London needs to deliver 81,000 homes, and I expect a lot better of you in the coming years. So again, something to watch there. I think you've got this coming together, but clearly Rayner is going to be putting pressure on Gove and those other metro mayors to really deliver. Again, one of the things we saw just last Thursday with Rayner was a very late call-in over in Sittingbourne. So this is the Quinn Estates application, 8,400 homes, very much a kind of sustainable urban extension. This is Swale Council with no up-to-date plan, no 5-year housing land supply. And her call-in, her intervention came just 3 hours before that committee where they were due to vote on that application. It was recommended for refusal. It was likely that was going to be refused as an application. She very much flexed her muscles to call that application, and that decision will now rest with her. So again, we're seeing her put into practice what she said she was going to do. So some interesting things to watch. Just a couple of other things just to mention as almost things that we're really looking out for over the next 3-6 months. The New Towns Task Force was announced back in July, really interesting process, and the task force chaired by Sir Michael Lyons, Dame Kate Barker as well, a fantastic coming together of some great minds. They're reporting to Rayner on a monthly basis. She's asked for their report in the year, effectively in spring next year, around where new towns might be, how they're going to be delivered, how we're going to see that come about, and I think that will be very interesting for us to watch and something we'll talk about, I'm sure, in months to come and in future versions of this event. Planning and Infrastructure Bill was announced in the King's Speech, confirmed in the budget that will be introduced early next year. We don't know much of the details yet that's going to be in it. There's some talk around reforming planning committees, talk about other elements in it, and potentially I think this is where you could see the work of the New Towns Task Force coinciding with how that works, and potentially we might just see new towns being put into that, what Beth was talking about, of economic growth, infrastructure, and potential for New Towns Force to be taken in, or new towns to be taken as almost a DCO process as part of the planning, and that would be what it really needs to deliver at scale. And finally, I just wanted to mention a very good report that was launched, again, off the back of, mentioned Kate Barker. The Radix Big Tent report was launched back in October. Very interesting part of reviewing what Kate Barker said previously. She was previously the chair of that report, but then was kind of recruited to the New Towns Task Force. And very, very interesting. She was replaced by Alex Nosse, and a really interesting report to read through. Lots of talk on strategic planning, on new towns, on planning overall. Definitely worth a read, and I'm sure we can share that round. So that's some of the aspects on the ground, James.
Good. We'll put a link up on the website to that report. I mean, a lot there, Andy. I mean, I mentioned in the overview of the 50 million allocated to expedite planning matters and said that's probably for 300 extra planners and graduates and apprentices. If Elmbridge are dropping anchor and trying to delay process, how realistic do you think it is for ministers to be saying, well, 6 months is all you've got, get on with it, or there's a problem?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and actually, in some ways, someone else said this to me. In turning around to the council and saying, no, I'm not going to give you 6 months, and I'm going to find your plan unsound, what they're actually saying is, well, then you've got to start again, and that's going to take 2 years or 3 years. So, in taking that approach, it's actually delaying the plan-making process. And what's Elmbridge, and not just Elmbridge, lots of other boroughs need a plan. And that's what we're in. We're in a system that tells local authorities, the NPPF has been consistent for 12 years on this. We're in a plan-led system. You need a plan. You need an up-to-date plan, and that's the important element. So, yes, speed is important, but equally getting a plan in place is the key aim, isn't it? So,
I mean, the Quinn Estates application that you reference. I mean, I think that there's a clear indication that ministers are going to be strong on matters. It's a big decision to call that in, and it's interesting to see how that progresses.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? I
Yeah,
think
it was.
like 3 hours before they were going to.
And it's a big, the planning inspectorate are very tight with resources. That's now fallen to them. Don't forget when Raina calls in an application, what she's doing is effectively saying that, well, you need to have an inquiry. So that's going to need a very senior planning inspector, very long process. Equally for the council, they've got to defend that inquiry and put resources into it. So none of it's easy, and there's no kind of quick key that the government have that in their tool chest that can expedite these things quickly. But we are seeing a flexing of muscles. Whether that results in the outcomes that we need remains to be seen. So
it's interesting that Sadiq Khan's not been immune from that as well. Thanks, Andy. A lot for future programmes, I think, in there. Beth, we're back to you on affordable housing solutions, and this is both budget and MPPF in terms of updates.
Well, I'll just do a quick whiz through, and I think mostly the reason why I've drawn this out is just because it's been such a headline issue, and even in the Labour manifesto, there's such a lot that's happened, and it's not just in terms of changes that are going to benefit affordable housing providers, but also in the kind of day-to-day work that we're doing. What we're finding is that developers are really struggling with their requirements to provide affordable housing, and so they're not being able to get deals done. They're not finding RPs who've got the capacity to take on the affordable provision of their development. And I mean, my experience as well is that there's still quite a lot of inflexibility within local authorities in terms of finding ways around that delivery. So, going back at the outset and renegotiating a Section 106 before it's signed to say, well, you need some flexibility in here. You need to have a cascade mechanism to reflect the reality on the ground at the moment, which is that, it's going to be tough to find an RP, particularly if you're a smaller size development. There just aren't people out there who are able at the moment or have the funding at the moment to take on those dwellings. So what we've currently got at the moment, we've got financing, so the autumn budget, the government made a big announcement, I think you referred to it, didn't you, in your list, delivering up to 500,000 new affordable homes, 500 million top up. It is a top up, so there is an existing affordable homes programme which they're adding more money into. Actually, what we really don't know is long term where that's going to go, and the affordable housing sector, and we all will have to wait until spring 2025, which will be the time when they provide details for the affordable housing funding post 2026. And I think at that time the government are saying they're going to be publishing a housing strategy. In addition, you have had right to buy. It's being looked at again. So the government wants to protect the existing stock of affordable housing by reducing right to buy discounts so that more affordable homes remain in the sector. Having undertaken a review into the levels of the right to buy discount, the government's conclusions were published in a policy paper which accompanied the autumn budget. And this paper confirmed that right to buy discount caps would be reduced with the effect from soon, it's 21st November, and that going forward these maximum cash discounts would not be indexed in line with inflation. Alongside the discounts, it was further confirmed that local authorities would be able to use 100% of their retained receipts from the right to buy sales to fund replacement affordable housing, rather than returning a share of those receipts, which was how it previously worked, to the Treasury. The intention being that this will enable better replacement rates for any homes that are still being sold under the right to buy with new lower discounts. Interestingly, a key detail that wasn't mentioned in the budget announcement was the scale of the reduction in the right to buy discounts. Rather than renewing the increased right to buy discounts, which were introduced in 2012, the government has essentially reversed them altogether. This means that discount caps going forward will revert back to the figures set in 2003, when property prices were obviously considerably lower, and especially in London and the South East. Just having a quick look at some examples, the maximum cash discount in most London boroughs will revert back to 16,000, in contrast to the current figure, which is 136,400. Outside of London, the current maximum discount is 102,400, but the 2003 regional discount caps were between 16,000 and 38,000, and these will now be reinstated. Such a lowering of these maximum cash discounts will likely mean that in high value areas such as London and large parts of the South East, right to buy sales will essentially be eliminated, which means for many in the sector a welcome change. But it will mean that over the next 5 years, potentially an additional 25,000 affordable homes will be retained. In addition, there's a social housing rent settlement. The government has announced it will also consult on a new 5-year social housing rent settlement, which caps the rent social housing providers can charge their tenants. The aim being that this will provide the sector with the certainty it needs to invest in new social housing. The intention would be for this to increase with CPI index inflation figures and an additional 1%. On top of this, the consultation has also looked at going further and is also seeking views on other potential options which would give greater certainty, such as providing a 10-year rent settlement. And bodies such as the Local Government Association and the Chartered Institute of Housing say that if you look towards a 10-year settlement, it will be more beneficial and it will really strengthen and provide stability in respect of housing revenue accounts. In addition, another point to look at is cross-subsidy. And this is the affordable housing providers' investment themselves in funds to build new affordable homes. And one of the principal means they do this is by selling homes on the open market, with the profits they make from this are then reinvested into new affordable homes. And this is what kind of historically has been called the cross-subsidy model. In recent years, this model has helped deliver affordable housing despite a sharp reduction in the level of government funding. However, it's always predicated on a strong housing market, and as we've seen over the past years, there's been ups and downs, and it's led to a significant income variability. The hope is the changes going forward with the government's kind of strong focus on putting the housing market and economy at the forefront of this, it could lead to a more settled period for income generation, which would improve the ability for cross-subsidy within the affordable housing sector. Finally, or maybe not finally, not finally at all, stable housing policy is an obvious one, but stability is one of the 3 pillars which the NPPF consultation exercise and the proposed changes to the planning system are intended to lean on to secure growth. The other pillars are reform and investment, but in December 2023, the changes to the NPPF were considered to be disruptive to the development sector and just detrimental generally to housing supply. And what the government are looking to do is make changes with the aim to essentially rewind the clock back to pre-December 2023 and demonstrate their intention to get the country building by creating stability both for market but also delivery of affordable homes. touched on this earlier in relation to the NPPF amendments, but the higher affordable housing for Greenbelt sites, land released in the Greenbelt will be subject to the government's golden rules, most significant of which, and I think the one that will really test developers, is that a development should deliver 50% affordable homes. This does, however, mean that the value of the land has to be sufficient to support delivery of the new homes, and the government is currently consulting on the way in which viability assessments will be undertaken for this. There have already been questions raised around the likelihood of 50% affordable housing being viable in most Greenbelt LPAs under the current approach to viability, and it may be that this proposal in reality does little to boost the provision of affordable housing beyond what is already being secured through affordable housing policy requirements that apply on any greenfield site as opposed to Greenbelt site, as there is little difference in reality between the sites that would impact on its viability. And then finally, increasing local planning authorities' capacity. It's one that will apply equally to boosting market and affordable housing supply. But there's a promise that the government is going to introduce measures which go towards assisting capacity in local authorities. So the government have announced that they'll appoint 300 new planning officers and a new accelerator programme, which essentially involves an expert group that is intended to work with councils to speed up planning policies and unlock stalled sites. In addition, the government has acknowledged that the timescales of planning and decision-making are getting longer and therefore is consulting on further ways to help boost authority capacity. One method being that they would allow local authorities to set their own application fees, which I think is an acknowledgement that current planning fee levels don't generate enough income to cover the full cost of some applications. Alongside this, the flip side of this is that there were issues potentially around the introduction of localised fee scales and variations between local authorities, the difficulties associated with this. But it is hoped that if there are changes through primary legislation, it could be another way of practically boosting the ability to deliver more market and affordable homes.
Thanks, Beth. Lots there. I think it's an interesting point you made at the beginning, which you would think would be a fairly simple way of unlocking some of the delivery problems, which is about the inflexibility of housing teams to consider renegotiating on Section 106s and cascading. You'd think it's such an easy no-brainer, really, to improve delivery, and you rather hope that something is done to put some pressure on.
The government messaging is there, isn't it? Yeah. That's loud and clear.
Yeah. And also the for-profit affordable providers. We haven't talked about them today, but I think they play an important and interesting developing role in the same way as the single family homes and build for rent schemes that are being funded by a number of the funds. So thank you for that. I forgot to mention questions. We want some difficult questions for Andy, particularly if people have got them out there, and for anyone else. So please click on the question section on the site so that we can have those for the end. We have had one question already, which is it true that Places and Spaces has got its own merch site on the website? So it is true. Well, I'm told it's true. There are pens and there are little baseball caps as well, apparently, that say "Make Planning Great Again." So I think they're selling like hotcakes. Right, Andrew. Really, really pleased that you're here. I'm sorry that us talkers have taken up some of your valuable time today. But you're here really just to give us a bit of an overview of some of the political agendas that are out there, and give us your views on how that's impacting planning and house building. So I guess first question, what is your take on the current political agenda? How is it impacting on planning and house building?
Thank you for the invitation to participate. It's been been a wild year in many ways. We had 6 months tail end of Michael Gove and that agenda, which kind of ran into the sand. And then we've had, 4 months now of frenetic energy with a new government coming in. I think my first two takes are, one is we're fortunate that we've got a very strong ministerial team. Rayna has been a bit of a revelation in the way she provided direction and energy to the department. Jim McMahon and Matthew Pennicup, very strong ministers who know their onions and know what they're talking about. So I think we're very fortunate in terms of the ministers that have come forward. And I think everybody would say, they've approached it with a lot of energy, a lot of ambition. I think you used the word bold, and I think that's absolutely right. The scale of the agenda is enormous, and it's sometimes worth just standing back and saying you've got 4 ministers in the Commons and a couple in the Lords, and they're dealing with the NPPF, Green Belt, Grey Belt, Brownfield sites, mandatory targets, plan making, resourcing LPAs. That's one issue. Devolution, everything to do with devolution, new structures, particularly regional structures. New Towns Task Force, strategic planning process. We're promised statements on strategic planning next year. We're all looking forward to that. That's a big moment. The Renters Bill, which is going through, which we haven't talked about, but very important for some of the, if you like, key constituencies that Angela Rayner talked to, just as the right to buy reforms are addressing that constituency. Affordable housing. The whole agenda around energy performance and energy efficiency in housing stock. And then sitting behind all of this is all the ongoing work post-Grenfell around building regs, building safety regimes. This is a truly enormous agenda. And I think if I've got one concern, really, it is too big. And they're charging on lots of fronts at once. And I think over the next few years, we'll see how it pans out. Sitting behind it is this somewhat challenging target of 1.5 million homes by 2029, which I haven't yet found anybody in the industry who believes that's an achievable target. And if I have a regret, I really applaud the ambition, but I have a regret that they've sort of saddled themselves, hoisted themselves on that particular singular target, because I think that will be very hard to achieve. Andy mentioned the planning and infrastructure bill coming forward next year. That could be hugely exciting because all the issues around the use of the NSIP DCO process for planning for infrastructure and potentially housing new towns is exciting. What are they going to do about committee structures and council decision making? There's a lot that could be impacting that. So I think it's all positive. There are very few people in the industry, on all sides of the industry, that are disappointed by the scale and the scope of what is coming forward. There's a lot of people thinking, is this doable? Where are we going to be in 3-4 years' time? Which parts of this agenda will succeed and which will just fall away? So that's, I think, the general context of where we are.
Okay. And problems? What's the main thing or the main challenge you think that is going to stop all of this?
Well, I mentioned that I wish they hadn't picked that target of 1.5 million, but they have. So put that to one side. To me, the single biggest challenge in all of this is the Treasury and the wider macroeconomic context coming forward. I think Peter Bill always makes the point that actually house building delivery is not about Whitehall targets or political posturing. It's about macroeconomics and the demand side of the economy. And I think, there's no doubt they're going to face a big buffeting there. The other obvious problem they're going to have to find a way through is local government finances. We all know that there are local authorities across England that are really struggling. Some have already gone into special measures of various kinds. And, it's the local authorities that are going to have the broad shoulders on a lot of this work, whether it's building safety, whether it's affordable housing, planning, obviously. So I think dealing with local authority finances and the resourcing of the system and reforming the system is one challenge. And then macroeconomics and the impacts of inflation and whether they do actually get the growth that they're trying to get is the other one. Ultimately, I think it has to be stated, and I'm not sure the government or the politicians necessarily appreciate this as much as the industry. Hitting those targets is down to the private sector, and it's down to the demand side of the economy. And, the only way of squaring that, if you like, is to have a massive multi-billion injection in public housing, whether it's local authorities or through housing associations. I don't think they're going to have the economic flexibility to do that alongside all the other things they want to do. And actually, even if they did turn around with this massive multi-billion investment in, for example, local authority housing, is there the capacity and the expertise and the skill base to actually deliver that? So it's a big agenda, and I give them 9.5 out of 10 for ambition, and I think they will put in place a lot of really good stuff which will come down the line. The team around the New Towns and Urban Extensions Task Force, that's fantastic. That will come down the line. I'm hoping the NPPF and the reforms of planning decision making will come down the line. But whether we'll get the fruits and the benefits in this Parliament and whether Angela Rayner will get the credit for it, I think it remains to be seen.
5 years, is that long enough to do all of this? Are we hoping that this government has a longer term that cuts in for a second term? Will that make a difference?
Well, I'll tell you what would make a difference if Mr. McMahon and Pennycock were still in the same jobs in 5 years' time. I mean, I think we'd all be delighted if we can have some stability there in terms of the ministerial team. It's clearly not long enough to do all of this. It is long enough to get some good things done. I mean, I think one of the, I mentioned that the 1.5 million target is problematic. I think the other aspect that's really problematic is devolution. It's noticeable if you look at the ministerial team. There's 2 London MPs and 2 Manchester MPs, or Greater Manchester MPs. And obviously the devolution agenda is very popular in Labour heartlands in the north, Andy Burnham et al., and they're committed to that. There's a lot in that that's very positive about kickstarting economic activity, about pulling things like strategic planning together. That's all very positive. However, it's quite disruptive. And, how much disruption and change can local authorities and housing associations deal with at any one time? So you've got the housing associations dealing with all the stuff around building regs and building safety, local authorities dealing with their own finances, all the issues they have of education, social services, all the other things they have to do. And then on top of that, in large parts of England, the reorganisation of the deck chairs in terms of structures. So none of this is bad stuff, but how you pull all that together and manage that agenda and ensure that you don't lose, you don't throw babies out with bathwaters, I think is going to be very challenging. But it's a strong ministerial team, so, I wish them well with it.
I mean, you will. Anything for Andrew? Beth?
I think I agree with everything that you've said there, and it's that huge task that they've got, and I agree those targets that they've met. I think to me the proof will be in how the NPPF comes through, the final version of the NPPF, and how much walk back there is on that, or whether Rayner fronts up to that process. It's interesting. You said again, too big. That process too big. Do you think that there should be more of a focus where, Rayner or Pennycook just have a mandate purely on housing, or do you think it's difficult to turn away from those other things?
Obviously Angela Rayner is also Deputy Prime Minister, so she has other parts of her day job which don't relate to our agenda. But I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I don't think it's about capacity in that way. I think it's more about simplifying their targets and coming up with realistic goals. So I think you'll find down the line, in a few years' time, they'll be tweaking some of this ambition and reining some of this in, because you can only do so much. But ultimately, I think you're completely right. The NPPF is fundamental to all of this. And the other thing we haven't talked about is what's happening politically on the ground. Because, of course, many of these authorities are not controlled by the Labour Party. And that will increasingly be the case. We've got local elections, obviously, in successive years, and you're going to end up with strong Liberal Democrat representation in the shires. Don't know what's going to happen with reform and the Conservative revival you would normally get. But it's quite clear that the governments are going to have an increasingly hostile local political agenda. I think one of the points that Andy made is really important. The Sittingbourne call-in is really important because they could have just let that run. They could have let the local authority have the meeting, refuse it, call it in later. They didn't. They've gone down what I would call performative politics. They've deliberately pulled it a few hours before the committee to send a bit of a red flag around all the local authorities to say, look, we are putting our boots on, we will intervene, we do want these plans sorting out, we do want delivery coming through. So that's interesting, and I think this team are strong enough to do that. What I wonder about is their actual powers. I mean, colleagues here will have more information than I have on this, but I mean, how do you actually enforce compliance of a local authority where, if you like, the alternative is to say we'll start again? That doesn't help the government either.
Something helps people in local authority to say it's not us, it wasn't our decision, it was taken away from us. We were going to refuse it. And I've heard it too many times where local authorities are saying, we've been stitched up. It's not us, it's central government. And I think almost it helps them because they can say, they can make that case back to their electorate. So
I think, well, I'll interrupt there. We got time issue, but a couple of questions coming in. How realistic is the government's target to build 1.5 million new homes in the next 5 years? Well, I think we've commented on that. How do all these agendas, this is coming in from Jeremy Baker, how do all these agendas relate to the long outstanding issue of strategic cross-boundary planning and the duty to cooperate? Saga, you alluded to that when you were talking a little bit about Mid-Sussex and the challenges that they had. So,
there's clearly a direction of travel. There's a thought process around how we could become much more involved in strategic planning, but that isn't the system that we work in at the moment. It's not as Andrew was saying, not the setup of local government, of how all that works. To get to that point of strategic planning will take quite a seismic shift in the way that runs. Now, that probably is something for the planning and infrastructure bill, but equally how that works and how that kind of comes through, I'm not yet convinced that there's a seamless route through to strategic planning.
I
think that's actually one of the key issues, and the problem is getting rid of strategic planning. I think it was Eric Pickles' era, wasn't it? Terrible mistake. The duty to cooperate hasn't worked well, and I think they have to get a grip of it, and that's why I think the devolution agenda is important, because to what extent does the devolution agenda disrupt that? But I think getting a process for strategic planning is crucial, because all these issues, every authority we're talking about, unmet need, the relationship between, if you like, the shires and the cities, and how you allocate those targets, it all comes down to taking a strategic view. It's great they're talking about that, and I really want to see that in the bill, or a strong statement on strategic planning, because I think that is the big elephant in the room, which everybody in the industry's talked about for a long time, and that will be a legacy decision of the government if they can get that right.
Okay. Other questions? I mean, this is another big one. I'm not sure we'll get an answer to this. How will water neutrality affect the government's push for more housing? Okay. 30 seconds on that. It's going to be a challenge. I mean, I'm alluded to the nutrient funding, or the funding to find solutions for nutrient mitigation. I haven't seen anything that comments on water neutrality and what measures government is going to take there. In Horsham, there's obviously the interesting Snows project, which is very much in its infancy. There are a number of independent providers that are trying to address the issue in terms of creating credits or banks in terms of neutrality. But I think it comes back to the problem we talked about or alluded to earlier, which is this tension between environmental matters and planning, particularly when you get to the habitat regs and I'm going to say Trump again, but it does feel that the regs trump everything else, and that will create this tension. So a challenge, I think, is the answer on that. Right, I've got to draw it to a close. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Andrew, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Beth and Andy, as always. We've got more to come. We're probably not going to get one in before Christmas, but it will be January time, and lots to go through, lots of exciting changes and things that are going to happen. Thank you for attending. Please give feedback. Please come up with questions or ideas for future programs. So, everyone, thank you very much.